Are you about to start writing your master's thesis or doctoral dissertation and are wondering how to go about writing the introduction? Let's figure it out together. So before I delve deeper into how to write an introduction for a dissertation or a master's thesis, first let me tell you clearly that my experience is based in United States English departments and within that post-colonial studies. So you might also want to check with what the policies and structuring of a dissertation is in your given institution or department. So to write an introduction, there are a few things you need to keep in mind. You need to keep the what, why, and how aspects of your dissertation in mind. Let me explain. The what part of your dissertation in the very beginning of your introduction would be, what is it that you are proposing to do in this dissertation? What is your thesis? Now, if you have questions about thesis and how to structure them, I do have a brief video on it. You can take a look at it. But basically, you start with a brief introductory paragraph. For example, you can say, in the last 20 years, a lot has been published about Salman Rushdie's 3 latest novels. And then you go into, in this work or in this dissertation, I propose to suggest that if read carefully, these 3 novels give us a message about hope, love, and peace, whatever you're trying to say. Now, that is the what part of your introduction. What are you going to write about, and what are you going to say about it? Now, remember, the what part of your dissertation, you just don't sit down and start writing it. What it presupposes is that you've already done your research. You have read several works about what you're going to talk about and figured out this is what not many people are saying, and I need to talk about it. That is the what part of your thesis statement and your introduction. So now, why? Most people don't pay much attention to the why part, right? But as you are saying that this is what I'm proposing to do in this dissertation, you must also point out why is it important, right? That's what will be the part of your introduction where you're telling the reader, well, here is the reason we ought to do this. First, it has been missed in previous works, but also by doing this, we'll either understand Rushdie better or we'll understand the world better. That's the why part, right? 2 parts of it. What are you trying to do, right? And then why is it important to do what you're proposing to do? So after you've set that up, then you will go briefly into who has said what about the work that you're going to write about. So that is what in social sciences is called the literature review, because you want to now ground your question, your thesis, into what previously has been said about what you have chosen as your topic. And where do you stand on that? What are you picking up from the previous works? And then how are you going to intervene or add to that previous knowledge? So in the very beginning, you gave your thesis and you started an overview of who has said what and how are you interacting with that. So you have grounded now the what part of your thesis in the introduction and an overview of what others have done about it, right? And then we go to the how part of your introduction. So the how part is 2-pronged. In the first part, of course, you will say, okay, now that we have learned about what others have said about this topic, I am going to use Foucault's concept of the abnormal or Deleuze's theorization of power as a totalizing force to reread this text and argue that this is what are its failings, or this is what it normalizes, or this is what it means, right? So this is first part of the how. This is where you will explain your theory. Now, in social sciences, literature review would cover this, but here the introduction is covering the how part. And another reason to introduce your theory and discuss is one, that you're trying to tell your reader that you understand the theory that you're going to use, right? But also, it enables you to forestall any objections that the reader might have, right? The reader might say, oh, you missed this critique of that theory, but you can build it in the discussion of your theoretical concepts. So you start with the what part. What is it that you're proposing to do? Why is it important to do so, right? Give us an overview of who has written what about your chosen topic before, and then go into how you will go about doing that. The first part of it is to discuss the theoretical concepts or tools that you will be using to do what you've proposed in the beginning of your introduction. Now, the second part of the how part of your introduction towards the end of your introduction would be the structuring of your chapters. This dissertation is organized in 4 chapters. In chapter 1, I'll be discussing this. In chapter 2, I'll be discussing this. And this is where also you can briefly add a little more detail. For example, if you're using a theory that you haven't discussed above, you can point out that here I will use the concept of ideology and I'll discuss it within the chapter, right? And so simply stated then, the beginning part of your introduction would be, what is it that you're proposing to do? That is your thesis. The why part, why is it important to do so? And then who has done what about the topic? That's your literature review, right? Mostly about other people who might have written about the book itself or the books that you're talking about. And then you go to the how part, which has 2 parts, right? The first is more important because this is where you will discuss your theory at length, in my opinion, so that there is no doubt left that you understand your theory and that there is a particular aspect of it that you're going to use. Your dissertation can't just be, I'm going to use Paulo Freire's work to read these 2 novels. You'll have to point out which particular concept from Paulo Freire and why, right? And then towards the end of the introduction, you will give a structuring of your chapters. Now, a few additional thoughts. And this, you can take it and maybe use it. An important thing is that most of the times, people in their dissertations just tend to stay with the text, right? This is what the text means, and this paragraph does that. A more sophisticated dissertation would also pose the question of what is it that the text normalizes? What can it do in the world? What does it do in the world, right? So there are different ways of structuring that. One could be that you could just look at the pedagogical efficacy of the text. What does it help us teach our students about literary studies, but also about the world? Or does this text help us understand the world better or live our lives better? These are also some aspects that you can add in your introduction to make your work more nuanced and sophisticated. There's another thing that you need to dispel, and that is some people, and I've read them online, suggest to you that you don't need to write your introduction in the beginning. You can write your dissertation and then write your introduction. I think that's a disservice to students. The introduction basically is the roadmap to what you've already researched. It serves 2 purposes. It tells the reader how, about what, and in what way are you arguing for a point of view. But it also explains to the reader your understanding of concepts and the literary text that you're talking about. But it also helps you in mapping out your work. right? And in giving you a guideline as you are writing a chapter, you will ask yourself, did I mention this in my introduction? And that is when you can go and tweak your introduction. But I would highly recommend, humbly, that do not start your dissertation without writing an introduction first. So these are some of my thoughts. A query was posted on the channel about how to write an introduction. Just briefly, I've tried to explain it. If you want a good example of it from my own work, I'll post a link to my most recent book, Democratic Criticism. It's available freely. Just read my introduction and see if it helps you. Now, one cautionary note there is that that introduction is written by a scholar, me, myself, at a stage in his career where he could be a bit more inventive and maybe a bit humorous. You might not want to emulate the style that I use there, but the structuring of that introduction is pretty much similar to any dissertation or a thesis. The scope might be different. So please take a look at it and let me know what you think. Now, if you have any questions or any experiences that you have had about writing the introduction to a dissertation or a thesis, please feel free to post them in the comments. I would love to read them and love to respond to them. In a few seconds, my playlist on writing, academic writing tips would come up. If you have time, please do check it out. It has some really good information. As always, thank you so much for your time and your support. Please stay safe, take care of each other, and I will now see you next time. Until then, peace and love.